Welcome to the long road. What we're going to do today is run through part of one of the scenarios from the campaign so we can cover, I don't want to say like basic rules, but cover enough rules that would let you play that particular mission, that particular scenario from the campaign book. Later we'll probably do other videos where we could show some of the more complex features, such as how advanced targeting works, your multispectral smoke, anti-tank guided missiles, helicopters, things like that. But what we're doing today will probably give you enough of the game concepts that you could at least play that particular scenario. So the scenario we're going to take a look at today is, again, it's from the campaign book, and it's number 3. Now, the campaign book, this will take you through a series of scenarios that will also introduce the paranormal elements, and we do have a tactics guide, well, not a tactics guide, but this book here called The Long Road Tactics that has just strictly kind of conventional warfare scenarios. Now, this particular scenario is called Ambush, so we'll just kind of briefly read that to get an understanding of why this is taking place. So, Ledetta had seen enough. Her clan had seen enough. It was time to get to work. To work, however, you needed tools. They had some: rifles, machine guns, even a handful of the Soviet rocket launchers, all scavenged from forgotten skirmishes or murdered soldiers. Better yet were the 2 Mark 82 bombs they had found, unexploded, but they needed more. Today they had word that a Soviet convoy was headed through the Brushveld forest. Their forest. This was their chance to not only kill, but also steal much-needed supplies. It mattered not to Ledetta that these men were Soviets. They would have killed Americans or Englanders just as willingly. They were all invaders. But today, the invaders spoke Russian. It would be the youngers' task to fight with weapons. After they sowed confusion, the elders, who could change at will, would finish the killing. So from that particular intro, we are going to be using some of the werewolf cards and factions, which will kind of show what we need to set up and play. Now, when you have your scenario chosen, it will mention the victory conditions. So the Soviet player has to get more victory points than the clan by the end of the turn, or at the end of the game, the last turn. And then here the Soviets, it talks some about how they're going to get their victory points. The clan, their victory points. And then we have the setup information, which we will pull out the counters here in a moment. But we'll look at the map and show where they could set up. Then we'll talk about the clan and how they put onto the map board. And very important for this particular scenario, there's actually a lot of scenarios. So we have: Soviet units may not unload, exit a road hex, or expend more than 5 movement factors until the turn after a Soviet unit is assaulted, fired on, triggers an IED, or a Soviet unit moves adjacent to a clan unit. The Soviet starts turn 1 with initiative. And there's a reminder: Lycans may not step reduce an armored fighting vehicle with an armor factor unless allowed by action card play. The trucks are unarmored vehicles, not armored fighting vehicles, and may be reduced. That's important because the big purpose of this is for the Soviet player to get a bunch of trucks off the west side of the map board. So the werewolves, essentially Lycans, they can attack vehicles, but that is very important to remember. If they attack a tank, unless they have a card that allows them to reduce those vehicles or cause damage, the most that they could do is disrupt an armored vehicle. But they can reduce and destroy trucks, which is what they want to do. The clan places its units as follows. Whenever the clan would be eligible to take an impulse, including opportunity fire, they may place any number of unplaced units or even a single unit in any forest or town hex. The units may immediately take an impulse. For example, if placed in the fire phase or during the Soviets' movement phase, the units may fire, following the rules of opportunity fire. If placed during the friendly segment of the movement phase, the unit may move. Placement of a unit on the board does not constitute movement. Units may set up in Soviet zones of control. Before the scenario begins, the clan player records the location of the 2 Mark 82 bombs, which have been converted to IEDs. The locations must be separate road hexes and cannot be hex A4, which we'll have to look right here. It's the very last hex on the map that a person could choose to escape from. So can't put it on the road hex leading out. We got that part. The clan player may detonate an IED when a unit enters the hex. The IED has an armor-piercing factor or high explosive factor of 12. It attacks a single target. So even if you have like 2 stacks, you're going to pick 1 unit within that stack to attack. The clan captures a truck by eliminating it in close assault. The truck is replaced with a wreck, and the clan player records 2 victory points on a beverage-stained napkin. Well, or whatever you want to use to track victory points. Keep in mind that the truck counter represents 3 to 5 trucks. The elimination represents destroying some, but salvaging others and the supplies they carry. Right, so even though you're destroying the truck and leaving a wreck marker, again, you got to remember this is platoon size, so each counter represents multiple vehicles. So in the case of trucks, 5 to 7 trucks or so, and they destroyed a few of the trucks, but captured the rest. The first time Ledetta is disrupted or reduced, she is infuriated. Determined to inflict her rage on her assailants, replace her with the Ledetta champion. This occurs even if the attack would have eliminated Ledetta. Place a move marker on Ledetta champion. Insight, reminder that an armed mob created by an insight action card is controlled by the clan. Alright, excellent. Then we'll go on. So there's quite a few special scenario rules to remember, so it's always good to have this handy, just, you know, to check it every once in a while to make sure you aren't missing anything very specific to the particular scenario. Then you have your action cards. Now that's important. Typically, when you play a game, unless specified, such as by the starting scenario rules, you're going to use the entire long road deck for the the NATO and the Soviet players. However, this particular scenario wants you to remove certain cards. So what I've done is I just kind of went through the deck and I pulled out the cards according to the scenario, such as it says discard like all the artillery cards. So anything that said artillery I pulled out. It says pull out airstrike cards, so I pulled out anything with airstrike, artillery. It mentions get rid of the Spetsnaz cards, they're gone, artillery. Get rid of the ECM card. So don't worry about what's on the top portion, the blue portion. That's for the NATO player. This particular scenario, one of the players will be playing the Soviet player. So you just make sure you're pulling out the appropriate cards for the bottom portion of the card. And I've got the counter battery, artillery, manpad. So all that's taken out. That leaves us with a much smaller deck to play from, but the cards are much more appropriate for this scenario. So there's like second chance, some rally cards, and as we have opportunity to play the cards, we can look at some and see how they would be used. Now also, it did mention in here, let's see, the beginning part. So in addition to telling me what cards to discard, it does say that the clan player begins with 2 cards. Now, the clan has their own separate deck. There's also, I had them set aside here, you're going to find there's smaller decks, if you will. There are some for anytime there's a zombie is played, the zombie faction, or the vampires, they'll have a small deck, and even the witch player has a small deck of cards. So again, they're very similar. They have, the witch has basically just like 1 spell per card, but the other factions, you'll see they have a top and bottom, much like if you look at the other cards where you have like the NATO on top and Soviet player on the bottom. So specifically with the Lycan, the top part is cards that you would play on the clan members, and then the bottom portion of the card is what you would play on the actual Lycan or werewolf itself. So we're going to have this set of cards here, and they'll be set aside. So we've got 2 sets of cards. The clan player begins with 2 cards. The Soviet player doesn't start with any. However, both receive 1 card per turn beginning on turn 2. So that's important. So this first turn, just the Lycan player will have some cards. So we'll go ahead and pull those now. And we'll see that depending on how the game goes when I would place units on the board, because remember our special scenario rule says that I can place them anywhere inside like these wood hexes on the board or a city hex. Then if I place like a Lycan, I could place use the bottom portion of the card, and again if it's a clan, I would play the top portion if it had something beneficial. So we'll look at the cards again later when I think of something or a time to use it. I'll point out a card I'm picking and why. So we'll set that aside. Alright, we won't read the aftermath. We'll save the outcome of that scenario for later because we might not get through the entire scenario. But we do want to get at least 1 or 2 turns in so you can see how the game flows. Alright, so that's your scenario. That's obviously going to be the most important part. Well, they're all pretty important, right? But without the scenario, you won't know what you need to bring. Now, we'll pull the scenario book out in a minute, and I will do this off camera. I will go ahead and find the counters, and then after I have all the counters punched, then we'll look and kind of see who are the combatants. But as you can see, you have quite a few counter sheets, and that's one of the things that the scenario book is going to tell you is which of these counters you're going to need. But I'll pull those all out separate off camera because that would be very boring to watch me pull those out. A couple other things that you need to play is first the terrain effects chart. So this is one of the player aid cards that comes in the game. One side then will let you know as you say do movement, as you move into a hex. Every vehicle, infantry unit, helicopter, they have a certain amount of movement factors. So when they are trying to traverse terrain, the chart, just a simple cross-reference. Here's your forest. It'll let you know if it's blocking, so essentially you couldn't shoot through it. However, there are some terrain notes here at the bottom. This is sometimes overlooked. The rule book itself might not have all the specific details of terrain, so it's very important that the first few times you're playing the game until you're familiar with it, if you see a little subnote such as blocking yes, look down here and it says create 1 hex shadow immediately behind terrain when sighted from a hill. So that would be very important to know later when you play. Then the movement cost, and it tells you up here that the movement cost is split. So when you see, for example, the forest, the leg value on the left-hand side of the split is for leg units, infantry, possibly like the Lycans, the foot people, if you will, the bipedals, zombies, that kind of stuff. And then on the right-hand side is the cost for vehicles, armored fighting vehicles, such as like your tanks and Bradley vehicles, BTRs, mostly trucks, vehicles is one way to look at it. And then if you go a little bit further, it does show how it will affect combat. So you have 2 columns, one is fire combat, one is close assault. This will tell you how it affects fire combat. So this is usually in the form of a column shift to the left. When we look at the combat table, shift results to the left, that's how that works. We'll explain that a little bit too, but typically shift results benefit the defender, shift results to the left, shift results to the right benefit the attacker. So if I, in this example, was doing fire combat at leg units in a forest, it says they get a defense of 2 shifts to the left. But again, read the subnote to see if it applies. The subnote here is 6. Down here it says 6. Units in forest hexes do not receive any benefit when targeted by an artillery or mortar barrage. And sometimes that might lead to questions like why. And one of the, at least for trees, I just know that when the shells explode and the trees blow up, it creates deadly splinters. So typically leg units don't like to be in woods when there's some kind of mortar or artillery attack. But then you could see that vehicles do benefit by 1 shift to the left. And then in a close assault, you would see that there's benefits for that as well. So that's the basics of the terrain effect chart. Then you're going to need the other side, which has your combat table. There's two tables on here. One is the fire results table. Down here is the close assault table. And right in the middle here talks about the range bands. And also what's really useful, good reminders, is here's some reminders on column shifts for based on the range. And then over here is great. You got a nice little summary of the counter types and the different values that they have. And again, little reminders down here. So very important, nice to have handy as well. But again, we'll explain these tables as we progress in the turn. The last table that you're going to need, or chart, is the turn record track. Very simple. You know, you're going to have a counter that you'll place to see who has initiative. There's a place to put your aid markers, focus, if you want to influence initiative. And what's really super handy to have next to you is the sequence of play. And as we progress through the turn, we'll look at the sequence of play and discuss those events and how they would play out on the game. Last couple of things, I promise, and then we'll get going. You'll need the 6 dice that come in the game. There's very few times that you need more than 6 dice, but just in case, if you happen to have on hand from some other games additional 10-sided dice, that's not too bad to have either, but 6 will handle most situations. I just happen to have a lot of role-playing games and a lot of dice hanging around. So in case I need those, I will use those. Then, a couple of these tokens to go along. Don't need all of it immediately, but the last, I think it's the last thing we need, these 2 cards. The Lycan player is bringing what are called some legends. Legends are the really important characters that can influence a story. Those heroes, those champions that would, you know, that single person that might change the tide of battle. And the Lycan player is going to have 2 of them, and you'll have a card for them when they're needed, and then they each will have a block that you can use to track the hit points. And the game comes with the blocks that you need. So, you know, as they take a hit, you just move it down the road, and then, see what I did there, down the road. Once you get to this middle one, flip. You don't flip this card. This card you don't flip. But there will be a corresponding counter on the board for that character that will correspond with the card. And those particular counters on the board will list icons for these special powers. And so just for your convenience, to help you remember what those powers are, they have them on the abilities card here for that particular character. Easy. And then once that gets to the flip, you flip the counter to its weakened side. So these characters tend to take a lot more damage than your typical unit does. Alright, those are the components you need. I'll go ahead, we'll pause the camera, come back in about 2 seconds with all the counters laid out, and we'll set up the board. Alright, see you then.